Good morning. This is Jason Dean, Film Fanatic, back at it again. Jason Dean YouTube. So thanks again. Been really excited doing these videos. Been cranking them out, and I want to thank everybody for checking out the video I did with my great buddy Emmett Layler. We did it on Sunday, and we just reached over 1,000 views. So really appreciate people checking out this this weird thing that I'm doing and that I love doing. So uh, that being said, like one of the things I really want to pursue more with this channel is to have more interview segments. So I have about three interviews, two that are one that is a really big one for me personally, and we're having a little bit of a problem, or not. I wouldn't say problem, but it's been a little tricky scheduling it, just because we live in two different states. She lives in California, and it's just been a little bit tough as far as the scheduling. So, but we'll work that out. But that guest is an actress who is in one of the Friday 13th movies. Super excited about a month ago or a little less. I did a big series. It was probably my first full coverage of a full franchise. I did a show or shows where I covered all of the Friday 13th movies, everything tied to it, and it was awesome. It was super fun. I learned a lot about the films, also about how to go about talking about these films and all those kinds of things. And the best part of it was watching, all 14 or 15 movies in a row. And it was great. And it was funny because I thought maybe by the end of, midway or towards the end, I'll be like, oh, I'd be in a state of, kind of sick of watching it and just burnt out. But I wasn't. I was like 100% the whole time. And it's my favorite franchise, favorite horror franchise of all time. And it's even outside of horror, it's my favorite franchise. So I had this because I put a lot of time into it, and it was kind of intense. I got in a little bit of a snafu around it because I was really excited about doing it and checking out all the videos, but it was also for me a little bit more work than I had expected because I was, I'd record the videos every day. I'd watch the movies at night, record them in the morning or in the afternoon, reviewing the films. But then I was also, trying to do it in order, obviously. But then I was also at the same time on my Facebook page, Film Fanatic, and then on my Instagram page, main at Film Fanatic. I was at that time also posting clips or posting reviews and photos of those same films. And I was trying to do everything in order and in sequence of the films. And I had recorded, I had recorded some of the videos back to back where I did, there were a couple of days I remember where I recorded two or three videos in one day or something like that. And I didn't upload them right away, and they were starting to kind of get out of order. And then when I had gotten maybe about 5 videos done, that's when I started to upload them, and I realized that I was uploading them out of sequence, and then I got to a point because I was totally in this, the Friday 13th world, and I was just, totally immersed in that, and I felt like after a while my head was on backwards trying to figure out which video I did for this movie, or wait, did I do this one? And wait, this is part 3, but I was up to part 5 and I didn't upload this video or that video. And then did I have all the posts up? So I got totally disoriented, and then I had to like start from the beginning and go through each movie, go through each review, and to a degree I had to almost start it over again in order to get the order right. And so I kind of learned, you know, a better way to try to do it, try to keep it a little bit more organized. But I got everything done. That part of it became a lot of work just because I'm not sometimes I'm not the most organized person, and I wanted to try to keep it pretty cohesive. And and the main thing was to try to keep everything in the order in succession of the films. And so that became a challenge. But since then, I did a Halloween franchise review, and since then I've learned how to be a little bit more organized around that. So, but while I was doing this whole thing, I was really excited, pumped about watching all these films. It kind of gave me even a new, renewed, found interest in the franchise as a whole. And then I thought, well, okay, this is something I love doing, and it was a little bit more work than I expected. It was kind of ambitious because it's a lot of films. So more on the technical side of things, it was definitely a challenge at one point. But then I thought, well, this is so fun. Why don't I try to think of and start brainstorming an idea on a idea to do some kind of special event to try to top this whole thing off. Tap it like something that can be like the apex of the whole thing, something special. So I started brainstorming about like what about for some in some you know crazy way I could like get in contact with an actor or an actress or somebody who worked on one of these actual films. Like that would be pretty awesome and kind of amazing to kind of like talk to somebody who actually legitimately worked on one of these films. For a franchise that means a lot to me. So I was able, I searched around for a while. I looked around for, through social media of some actors and actresses and people who worked on the film on the technical side. And I kind of came across a few of these folks who were basically making a career from a movie that they had done like 30 or 40 years before, and they were very active. They were older, but they were doing all these conventions and interviews. And so I went around and I reached out to a few of these people through social media. I found like their Facebook pages or their contacts, more or less. And one of the actresses I reached out to, I noticed that she was, I believe she lives in California, and she was an actress in one of the movies. And I looked at her post, and she was, you know, her career from that one movie was all about Friday 13th. She was traveling all over the place to all different horror conventions. She was still like getting, obviously getting royalty checks. She has, I think, a few books based on her experiences in the Friday 13th franchise. Really prolific, and that's all she was doing. So I reached out to her, and she got right back to me, and I was really excited. And so we talked about this possible idea, and she was totally open to it. So right now I'm in the midst of us trying to nail down a time for the actual interview. So super excited for that. Not sure when it's going to happen. Hopefully, pretty soon. And then, so a couple of other ideas I had were two other guests that I have, which I know logistically will be a lot easier to schedule. As I've talked about before on my page. I talk a lot about music because for me, music and film, are kind of symbiotic. Particularly around my band Quantum, I talk mostly about that band because that is, film is such a direct source of inspiration for that band, that project. So I talk about music and then I talk about other things related. So I try to keep them together, even though they're different genres or different fields in the art realm. For me, they're connected at the hip. So one of the things that I've been doing for, I guess, for a long time is I've been teaching lessons, mostly teaching like drum set lessons. I've done a few. I've worked with a few different ensembles, like mostly drum or percussion ensembles, and groups of people, groups of kids. But mostly what I've done is I've taught lessons over the years. And my first time I ever got involved with teaching drum set was many, many years ago. There used to be this music shop in Belfast. I think it was called Belfast Music, and they had two different locations. And their first location, they had a storefront, but was like kind of out on the outskirts of town. And I remember going in there and inquiring about, if they needed, if they were, thinking about or desiring to have like somebody come there and teach drum lessons. And they were totally open to it. And then I got a teaching job there, and I taught there for probably I don't know, maybe a couple of years. And I had like a handful of students during the week, and I just kind of threw myself into it because I didn't really have the experience doing it. But it was a long time ago, and it was great. And then after that, um, after the store moved to a different location. They moved into town in Belfast, so they didn't have the space that they had for teaching anymore. So I wasn't able to teach there anymore. But I liked or loved the experience of doing it. And so at that point, I started, people were contacting me about, teaching, maybe if I wanted to give them lessons. And I ended up, over a period of a couple of years, I ended up having, about 10 to 12, maybe 15 students over a course of like a week or so. And I was teaching mostly high school kids. I was teaching people from like, most of the kids I was teaching were from like Belfast High School. And I taught some kids from Camden Hills in Camden, Maine. But most of the kids I was teaching were high school kids, and they were from Belfast. And and again, it was one of those situations. I don't really ever think I know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to like, trying to learn, and I wanted to kind of get the experience. But so for a while, I actually acquired a pretty good amount of students. I was teaching right out of my house. And for me, it's always been this interesting thing of like, where you have these labels where you have like, the teacher and then the student. In my own personal experience, I've been really fortunate in my life to study. I studied a lot with a lot of different teachers, and I've had some really amazing teachers over the years, privately, and then when I went to school. And I'm a firm believer in that you never stop learning. So, you know, you can still exchange educational ideas, and even if you're not in that like traditional format of where you're going to see a teacher every week. I feel like you can do it in lots of other ways, but that same kind of you know way of thinking about it is the same, or that same exchange is the same. So that sticks with me now. But even back then, when I had no experience really, and I was acquiring quite a few students, and I was trying to figure things out as I was going. You have your traditional role of like the person who's the teacher and then the student. And I found for me, I was in some ways just I was equally as much of a student as they were, because there were certain students that I had that were pretty good, and they were like picking up things very quickly. So every week I would have to practice some new things, or repurpose my practice on certain things to try to keep up with some of the kids I was teaching, because they were on this big learning curve. And that caused me to really re-examine my own abilities, and certain things that I was not very very confident on, or didn't really have the ability that I needed to have. So it forced me to like really um, to basically I felt like I was being taught by them. And so for me, it's like, yeah, there's the label of the teacher, blah blah blah, the student. But for me, I feel like, well, I get out as hopefully they get a lot of things from me, from what I talk about or show them. But for me, it's equal from what I get from them, particularly around the kids or students or adults that I have that are legitimately into it and want to pursue something a little bit more serious. So it's always a great learning thing for me. Most of the students I've had over the years have always been like people who, or kids who have had no experience playing an instrument before. So I'm usually always starting at ground zero. That's been the majority. I've had some students that are intermediate, and then I've had one or two students that are actually very, very good. Um, so, but generally, my experience was with beginners, and I always would talk about the thing of like, and some people when they take lessons, or whether it's piano lessons or whatever instrument it is, they have this interest and they look at it as this could be a good hobby or this could be a fun thing to do. Maybe it's something I want to do is just like a cathartic release, something I want to do where I can just play, on weekends, or maybe it's something where they want to move it to where they can like play in a band and play gigs and do some recording and maybe even go on tour and all those kinds of things. And I had a few students. I had like two or three students over the years that were got really good and they got really serious. And one of them went on to become started playing drums in a fairly well-known band in the area. And that for me was a really great feeling of like to a degree of accomplishment where I felt like okay, maybe I had an impact, and it felt really great. Um, and then after I did that for years here, or for quite a few years, fairly recently I got hired by um, Bay Chamber Music, which is like just an amazing music school. I was teaching there for quite a while, also, and unfortunately, due to like lots of circumstances, and mainly due to the pandemic, right before the pandemic, I had quite a few students there, and then I lost a lot of the students because of the pandemic and all those things that it involved. And then I kind of got back into having a few students, and right now I'm not really teaching there now, but I for the last since this summer I've been teaching privately again. I got a handful of students, and they're this group of people that I've been teaching are a little bit older, so but anyway, so I have this newer student, this guy Ray, who I started teaching over the summer, and he's a super cool guy, super interesting. He's got this awesome personality, and he's got an interesting and incredibly varied background. But when he was younger, in his 20s, and when he was in high school, he played drums quite a bit. He had friends that were musicians, and I think they played in bands and did various things. And then he kind of stopped playing for many, many years, and now he's like getting back into doing. He just bought his new drum set. So right now we're kind of focusing on like basically, bringing some of that stuff out of the dark, of like stuff the basic technique things that he had acquired when he was younger, and we're kind of taking that stuff, bringing it back, but then trying to move it forward a little bit, and it's very, very cool. One of the things I've always talked about with students is like, even if it's whether it's a beginner, somebody who is at a beginning, a very beginner level with no experience, to even people who have been playing, say, for a while. I typically always focus on real basic fundamentals. We'll work on, you know, um, introduction to jazz playing, reggae playing, Latin music, um, various forms of rock and roll, fusion stuff, introducing odd meters, basic. I try to focus on multiple genres over a period of time, but where it's all kind of steeped in the basics, and then also with rudiments, working on building technique on the snare rudiments. I always kind of emphasize, and we always work on that, on those kinds of things. And basically, what I tell a lot of the students in the literal sense is like, depending on how you want to do this and where you want to take this, I try to make it a real, I try to give it a real straightforward approach. And I say, well, like my goal is if you're serious about this and you want to like pursue it in a way of where you want to kind of maybe make something happen with it, is I try to give you enough technical faculty and the little knowledge I have. I try to instill that to this person. And basically, it's like, well, if somebody calls you to be able to fill in for a band, like say their drummer is sick or he can't do a gig, and they want to get you to see if you're interested in playing this local gig at even like the local dive bar in town, you would have enough ability to just to do that gig. You know, just that you have just enough technical faculty and experience to be able to go and cover that job and that gig. And that's really what I do. That's kind of all I want to do. And obviously there's next tiers to that and other levels and all kinds of other things that can that you can go with into from that. But that's the general kind of you know the general rule of how I think. I've been fortunate enough to study with lots of really great teachers, some really incredible teachers, and a lot of those things uh, that a lot of these teachers I've had over the years instilled, kind of brought up to me or instilled in me, are things and various concepts or things that I'm still working on even to this day. I never feel like I've arrived at the end game or the goal. It's really about the journey. So I always feel like there's always so many new things to learn constantly. So that's what I try to more or less, bring to light for people. But anyway, so Ray, who's a student of mine, one day we were talking about, just different hobbies and different things that we like to do. And I had mentioned, yeah, I do this Film Fanatic thing. I have a YouTube channel I just started, and I have a couple of, I have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and I do these reviews, and it's a lot of fun, and I've been learning a lot about it. And then he had said, "Oh yeah, I have this background. A few years back, I acted in a bunch of these like super low budget indie horror films." I was like, "Oh wow, like that's pretty awesome. I had no idea." And so then he continued to tell me about, he worked in a bunch of different films about 5 or 10 years ago. These like super low budget horror films, and I was like, "That's awesome." So he gave me a little list of films. I asked him, is any of this stuff available, like that I can see? So then he gave me a little list of different things that he'd worked on, and then a week or two after that, I looked them all up and I found some of the stuff, and I was like, wow, like this is great, this is awesome. There, and the thing that was super funny was, like most of I do try to cover lots of different styles of movies. Like I mean, I just did a big series on the Avenger films. Those are like as big budget as you can be as far as Hollywood, and I love those films. But kind of the primary focus of what I have on this channel is where I focus on a lot of these like super low budget obscure horror grindhouse movies. And after watching the work of Ray in some of these films, I'm like, this is totally what this is. Like he's doing all of these kinds of these films that he's worked on, these projects are totally like of that genre, even though they're like on the, they're fairly recent. So I had this idea, like, what about, and I asked him like on Monday when I saw him, we had our lesson. I was like, hey, what do you think? Would you want to be a guest on the show? And we can talk about your experience, because I think the stuff that you showed me was great, and it's totally in step with the majority of the videos I post and what I love. And he was totally into it. And plus, I thought he's got this awesome personality. He's a total character, and he's a real genuine, sincere guy. He's got all these great stories. So he's going to be a guest on the show, and I'm super excited. We're going to be scheduling that pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be a real interesting show. And the other show coming up, pretty funny story behind that. Last week, I went out to dinner with my folks and my great friends Daniel Richmond and Jillian Reed. And we went out for dinner, and we were talking about, the page, and, I was saying, because I had just done a show with with my friend Emmett Layler. And again, I really want to thank people for checking out that video. I've gotten, he was awesome. We did a show mostly on Stephen King, and then all things, other outside of that related to horror. And he was awesome. He's one of my best friends, and we'll probably do some more shows together. But it's been great because that video has gotten thousands and thousands of views. So I really appreciate people's support. It really means a lot and gives me more enthusiasm to keep this thing going, this crazy thing going, and to try to make it better each time. And but we were talking at dinner. We were talking about the page and stuff and the YouTube thing, and Daniel had said something. He's totally off the cuff. He says a lot of things off the cuff, and he's a total goofball most of the time. He's like, "You should have your mom on the show." And I was like, and my mom started laughing, and then I had said, "Yeah, you should do it. Maybe it would be fun." And I was kind of kidding around, and we were just kind of, just goofing around with that idea. And then later that night, and then especially the next day, I, started thinking of, I started brainstorming about new things that I could try with this channel as far as interviews, because the interview segments, I've only done it a little bit, but I really love doing it. For me, it's something I really want to pursue more. I feel it's something I don't really see too much on YouTube, as far as guys that I really love. They don't really do that kind of thing, and I think it's a little bit of a different angle. It's mostly something you see in the podcast world. There are obviously lots of YouTube channels that focus on having guests, but the thing that I would kind of seek out, I haven't really seen that kind of combination where they have guests as a regular thing from various backgrounds. So I was, that after we had dinner, I was thinking of ideas of guests, and then I was like, you know what? And then I thought about, what about if I have my mom on the show? And I'm like, initially I was like, that's, kind of silly, kind of goofy, and, I don't know, just kind of hilarious. And then I started thinking about it in terms of like a little bit more of a serious thing. And I was like, no, wait, it totally makes sense, because I've talked about my parents, particularly around my mom. I've always had a great relationship with them. And I've talked about my mom, our, our relationship, and how, she was really key in introducing me to film and horror as a kid. We used to go to a lot of horror movies. We used to go see the Friday 13th movies when I was a kid, and Gremlins, and she took me to see Aliens, the sequel to Ridley Scott's movie, and it just terrified the crap out of me. But her whole thing growing up was she was really into Alfred Hitchcock, who's one of my favorite, directors. But then she was also really into a lot of the early slasher films, like Friday 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. She's also really into the Final Destination franchise, which is really funny. She likes all kinds of movies, but typically her thing is like the horror kind of thing. And as a kid, like that's how I got introduced to film, was watching like Psycho from Hitchcock and The Birds, and then eventually stuff like Friday 13th. And she kind of introduced me to that, and we used to watch that stuff together all the time, and we still do watch horror movies together. So, and that was totally what shaped my, warped brain. And so I was like, no, that on paper, that totally makes sense. Like, that's kind of why I am why I am, why I'm the person I am, is because of that. So I'm gonna have my mom on the show, and it's probably gonna be hilarious and funny and goofy, but I think it'd be great. So look forward to that. That's gonna be something that's gonna happen pretty soon. And she said, sure. She was like, she thought I was kind of crazy at first, but then she was like, no, okay, well, let's do it. That'll be fun. And she's like, if it doesn't come out good, you can delete it, right? And I was like, yep, we can do that, or you can edit it or something. So I was like, yep, no problem. So stay tuned for that. So all that being said, this brings me to this amazing movie here, Love Brides of the Blood Mummy. This came out in 1973. It was directed by Alejandro Marti. It's a Spanish-French film. I had never seen this film. I picked it up on a total whim. I've been going the last couple times where when I went out shopping. I've been going to the Bull Moose in Brunswick, Maine, and it's one of the smaller kind of locations, but they have an amazing selection. It's a little bit further for me as far as driving to, but they have an amazing movie selection, and I got this there, and I was just like, I've never heard of this movie. It's also part of the company Mondo Macabra, which is a a Blu-ray company. They're kind of emerging as possibly my favorite company, if not one of my favorite companies as far as these reissues, because they really specialize on this like on these totally deep dive, totally obscure exploitation movies. And I've gotten a bunch of films in their series that are like wicked obscure, but they're just amazing. They're so like sleazy and so incredibly low budget. And this is another Mondo Macabra. And this movie's a gem. I totally freaking love this movie. And the story, this movie itself is totally bizarro and it's super sleazy. The whole premise of the story is basically centered on this guy who is like kind of a mad scientist slash archaeologist, and he discovers this mummy. And after he opens the sarcophagus, he realizes the mummy, who is the main character, is still intact. He's basically made of flesh. So he creates these experiments, like with these various blood transfusions, to basically bring him back to life. He eventually achieves that, and then he discovers that this mummy can only function with can only function on human blood being his source of food. So at that point, he decides to go out into the countryside and kidnap these people and kill them, and then they drain their blood and they use it to bring this mummy back. And eventually, this mummy comes back, and he's this walking being. And it goes even further, where he realizes that the next thing for his like kind of evolution is for only women to be captured. So basically the mad scientist captures all these women, and they put these women like in these cages, and the mummy basically tortures and rapes these women and then drinks their blood. And this brings him even more into reality, and helps like sustain his life force even more. And the thing that's pretty shocking about this film, like again, it's super silly and campy and ridiculous, ultra low budget, but it's very at times it's, and I could see for some people it being impossible to watch, but there's a lot of rape scenes in it. So be forewarned, it's pretty rough. There's a lot of torture scenes and rape scenes in it, and it's not graphic per se. There is the graphic nature of it, lots of scantily clad people or nude, lots of nudity, but there's a lot of rape scenes and it's rough at times, even though it's again like it's super campy and like hard to take at all seriously. It's rough, and so I can understand that being a real challenge as far as getting through the movie. The other interesting thing about this film is it's obviously the mummy is a universal monster, as well as like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman. And this movie very much plays out like it reminds me very much of like something taken from the classic Mary Shelley Frankenstein book. The doctor in it, who's the archaeologist, is very much like a Dr. Frankenstein, and because he's this mad, crazed scientist, and he's bringing back this creature, and he lives in this big giant castle. So it has, and then when the mummy comes back to life, he very much has this whole like kind of Count Dracula presence. So it's weird. It's not like, it doesn't really stay in line or do anything that you would typically see in a, like, say, a classic Boris Karloff movie like The Mummy, or other films that have been centered around like the mummy character. This is very different. It's much more in the line of like a Count Dracula because of the castle element. It's got this real gothic kind of vibe, and plus this mummy feeds on blood, and he actually like bites the victims in the neck, and you see him drinking the blood. So it's totally derived from the whole like Count Dracula thing. But it's totally rough to see a lot of the rapey scenes that are in this movie. But if you can get past it, you have a pretty good threshold. It's a freaking awesome movie. I'm super excited I bought this. Mondo Macabre is the, just an amazing company. They specialize in all these super obscure, bizarre movies. The Blu-ray transfer of this is amazing. The music is incredible. Every time they have the Mummy, because he's in almost every scene in the movie, which is just crazy and kind of overwhelming. They have this theme that he has, the music that they use, and the music is just amazing in this film. It's very kind of psychedelic. There's and it's so 70s, like almost like borderline porn music. And yeah, I can't say enough. The only thing that's disappointing is there's not any special features on here. There is a commentary track with somebody who was involved, I believe the director, that I'll eventually check out. But there's no special features, which is unfortunate. But still, that being said, this movie is amazing, and you know, be forewarned for some of the graphic kind of nature of this film. But uh, that being said, this movie totally rocks, and this is now one of my favorites. So, Love Brides of the Blood Mummy, amazing film. So this is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. And if you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Have a great day.